from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean, for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Crow. I thank you, our witnesses, for testifying today, and of course, even more, thank you for your service to our country. I also recognize the service members in the audience, veterans and service members, as well as Gold Star families. My heart is with you, our gratitude is with you, and it's something we can never repay. This 20-year war cost our country so much, and while the end was devastatingly heartbreaking, we could not continue to send Americans to fight a war no longer in our vital national interest. We owe a tremendous debt to the more than 2,400 U.S. service members killed and the more than 20,000 wounded during the 20-year conflict in Afghanistan. And we are here to understand what happened and, importantly, to learn how do we do better in the future. As my Democratic colleagues have said, August 2021 did not happen in a vacuum. This was a 20-year war. And to understand that what happened, we need to look at the broader context. Colonel Crumrich, you testified in response to a question from my colleague, Mr. Kim, that prudent steps were taken in 2020 to start withdrawing troops, but later, when we saw that the conditions weren't being met by the Taliban, General Milley and others ceased the drawdown. But isn't it true in January of 2021, President Trump further drew down U.S. troops just days before the change of administrations?
I would have to go back and look. I don't know the specific answer to that question.
I believe it is. I think maybe drew down to 2,500, literally within days of what we would hope was a peaceful transfer of power. Do you believe that President Trump knew that the Taliban was not meeting the Doha deal?
Yes, which is why there was a halt on the withdrawal in late 2020.
And yet a continued withdrawal in January, just days before he was to leave office.
I would have to go back and look at those numbers.
If you would provide those to the committee, that would be really helpful, and I think we need the record to be as clear as possible. For all of you, what lessons should U.S. civilian and military leaders take from this war? Colonel Kalenda, as you point out, what happened in Afghanistan is not unique. There was Iraq, before that was Vietnam. I had two brothers who served during the Vietnam War in the Navy. My eldest brother, Bob, served two tours of duty in Vietnam on destroyers and hospital ships. I remember as a little girl the devastation of that war and, of course, of the end of that war. How do we prevent another such disaster, Colonel?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And I'm not sure if Minersville, Pennsylvania is in your district, but one of my troopers, Dave Boris, is buried there at the cemetery.
Oh, my. Thank you for telling me that.
I wrote this book, Zero Sum Victory, What We're Getting Wrong About War, to address the exact question that you posed. I think there are a lot of different reforms that we need to make so we don't have a disaster like this occur again. I identified a few of those in my written testimony, to include the fact that we need to put somebody in charge on the ground, in charge of all U.S. forces. We need the State Department to develop an expert body of knowledge for conducting wartime negotiations in which we're a participant. I found the whole process leading up to the Doha Agreement to be deeply troubling, where instead of trying to focus on a deal and putting a total withdrawal of U.S. troops on the table immediately, as participants have told me it happened, we should have instead worked this a bit more like the Northern Ireland peace process, where it was a step-by-step process, testing the Taliban's bona fides and intentions to see if they would uphold their commitments. And then you got to make sure that you got accountability and somebody on the ground who is able to make those determinations about accountability in the event the adversary doesn't uphold their terms. Finally, we need something just as basic as a national security doctrine, a set of terms and concepts, so we're all, the same terms mean the same things to the same people. We don't have that right now. So DOD speaks one language, state speaks a different language, the intelligence community speaks a third language, and coordination, good strategy, good policy falls through the cracks.
I thank you, and I see my time has expired. Again, I thank you all for your service, and for those in the audience, thank you also. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. At this point,